Okay, so this detail we have some window drawings. Windows can be tricky. The main areas where windows tend to be tricky are usually the window frames and what kind of windows we have. So I've done two details. We're going to stick to a scale of 1 to 10, even though often they can be asked at 1 to 5. We'll stay at 1 to 10. As always, nicely presented page, border, title box, your name of the detail, your scale, and we have two drawings to do here. Equipment I'm using, a 2H pencil. I'd recommend you use a H pencil for any darker work. Just for the sake of the video, I'm going to use a HB pencil so it's a bit more clear to see. I've got my T-square. I have 60-30 set square, 45-degree set square, rubber, and my pens as well. So red, black, blue, green pen for any pen work that's needed with maybe radon or DPC or whatever else it's needed for. Okay. So just to look at the main types of windows that would be asked. On the left hand side I have a casement window and it's double glazing. We could be asked double glazing or we could be asked triple glazing. So I've done a double glazing window on the left hand side and a triple glazing window on the right hand side. Just to be clear for people what a casement window is. A casement window is basically a window like these here. It's basically a window that very common to see a window that has a part that opens. So there's an upper part of the casement window, there's another part of the casement window. These are the parts that open. You've got your main frame around the casement window, and you've got these smaller little windows, little smaller window frames if you want, that open out in various different ways, and these casement parts become in different shapes and sizes. Alright, so a casement window is something along those lines. And this is kind of often what confuses students, especially when you're doing these details for your first time. This part here is the fixed frame part of the window, so this is the frame of the window, if you like. This is a casement window. This would be a big casement window, maybe that might open out that way, or maybe it might open that way. But this is the smaller frame part of the casement window. So you've got the main fixed frame, and you've got the smaller casement part of the window as well. Alright, and the fixed frame window it's a bit easier. It's just simply there's no casement part that opens out. There's just a fixed frame here, and a fixed frame on the bottom, and you're triple glazing in that. You know, that could be a double glazed fixed frame window. That could be a triple glazed casement window. Just for the drawing details we're going to do, we've got a double glazed casement window, and we're going to do a triple glazed fixed frame window. Okay, as I said, lads, you know, we're mainly dealing with just some walls and so on, but the tricky part is often drawing the window frames, so we'll take our time when we're working through the window frames themselves. So we'll start off with the double glazed casement window, and we'll just start off, we'll keep it fairly over to the left hand side of your page, and I'll start down fairly low, and I'm going to start off by just drawing a wall. So the first thing I'll do there is draw the outside of the wall. This is all light work as usual. I'm going to go a little bit heavier for the sake of the video. 100mm external leaf, 150mm cavity, and 100mm internal leaf. Lightly drawing those lines. I'll just rub out that guideline there now. And I'll just pick a point to be the top of the wall there. Again, it's all light work for the moment. And that's what we're going to go for at the moment. So we've got our external leaf, our cavity, and our internal leaf. Now, let me just talk you through the windowsill itself. This is the concrete windowsill on the bottom section of the window. You'll notice that the windowsill is built back down into the wall, so again we've got a smaller block here. Sometimes this external leaf can be built up to the top and they'll put the windowsill on top of that and they'll fill back the area. So either is acceptable. In our case here, we'll just build it back down into the wall. I think it's kind of a tidier piece of work when it's built back down into the wall. So the size of the windowsills, they can vary in shape and size depending on your manufacturer, but two sizes that I like to go by that are in the book are 270mm that way, 275mm that way, and 100mm this way. How far across the cavity you come to start that off, you can use your own judgment. This windowsill is going to rest on this block wall section here, so what we'll do is we'll go roughly about halfway across the cavity. I'm going to go down 100mm. I'm going to go across 275, so I'm going to rip out that part of the block there now. 275. So when drawing the windowsill, as I said, 100mm there, 275 there, and then from that point I will go just across just a little bit here. From that point, use your judgment to go up 50 or so mil there, bring it down a little bit there, and get the shape of your windowsill. So as long as your windowsill takes that shape, you're fine, because as we said, depending on the manufacturer or whatever else, they can vary slightly in size, but they're all going to be roughly that shape. So I used two measurements, 100mm there, 275, and then just use your judgment to get the rest of the shape done. At that point, you know, that windowsill then is fixed, it's mortared into place on top of that wall. We can maybe heavy in the rest of the cavity wall for a moment and draw in a couple blocks. $225mm for the blocks. There, might squeeze another block in. Just goes right down to the border, so I'll leave that off there for a moment. You can draw a second block in there if you like. Right, next we're going to draw a cavity closer, so I'm going to go down maybe 40mm for a cavity closer. We've looked at those in our notes several times. Solid plastic member wrapped in insulation. We've also got internal cavity insulation on the wall also. So we'll just do the symbols for those bits of insulation. So that's the cavity closer. And I'm going to keep going with the insulation down through the cavity as well. Alright, so that's the bottom section so far. That what we're going to do. The window frame is going to rest on top of that, but what we'll actually do at this point is we're going to go and we're going to draw the top part of the wall section just to make sure it's all lined up. These obviously have to be lined up. Sometimes you see students, they make a mistake of drawing this wall here and they go up and they go over to the side and they draw the upper part of the window. They have to be perfectly in line with each other. So lightly, very lightly, and extend these lines up. So there is the guidelines for the internal wall. There's the guidelines for the external wall. And we'll draw a guideline for the cavity insulation as well. You can look at that afterwards. How far up do I go for the window? Obviously that can vary depending on the size of the windows. Architects and manufacturers will all decide that. We'll just go up a reasonable distance to make sure it looks like a window. I will zoom in a little bit on this section here now. Draw a line across and extend up darkly on these parts here because they're going to be staying. Now, as we all know, on top of any window or any door there is a concrete lintel to support the wall above it. Concrete lintels, we're going to make 80 millimeters high, so 100 mil wide, 80 millimeters high. We've got a lintel on this side and we've got a lintel on that side, and represent that there with some reinforcement steel as well. Okay, we'll get our insulation symboling done. Nice and tidy, as always. We're drawing position of a few blocks there now as well. 22.5 millimeters. There. And there. Alright, at this point then we are ready to start looking at, so as I said, we're going to make a start on the window frames there now. This is where it often gets a bit confusing for students. With a casement window, so once again this part here is going to be the fixed frame part of the window, and this part here is going to be I suppose the smaller frame fixed to that can potentially open out that way or maybe open that way. So it's the part of the window frame, it's a smaller window frame fixed into the window frame, hinged into it, that can open out or open through the side. Sizes of these are where often students get confused and frustrated. Size of these, look, windows are all going to change in size depending on the manufacturer and so on, so we're not going to overthink the size too much. I like to just kind of go by some general guidelines. I'm just going to sketch up a little bit an approach that we're going to take to draw this. What I like to do when we're drawing it, right, I'll draw the fixed frame in first. I'm going to draw a rectangle roughly 100 millimeters this way, maybe 70 millimeters that way. That'll be my fixed frame. In a position similar to this, I'm going to draw another little square, say 60 by 60. Alright, that's going to be the casement part of the window, so the part that opens out. That's going to be fixed in there like that. Now there's a little slot that needs to be taken out here for the glazing or for the glass to come into, so we can go take a little section out of that there. And then we're going to draw our double glazing is going to come straight up like that. There's one bit of glazing and there's a second bit of glazing. There might be a little section there to hold that in place. Now if you look at these drawings in your books, there's often a couple of more little chamfers or fancy parts added, so if you wanted to put a little angle there, maybe a little angle there, or even round them off, that gives a bit of a design to those windows. How big are those angles? Don't overthink it, because as I said, they will vary depending on manufacturers. These window frames nowadays are thermally broken as well. That means there's insulation inside them. So we're going to draw some insulation inside the middle of the fixed frame and some insulation inside that to avoid thermal bridging from occurring. Alright, and that's the approach we're going to take. We're going to be a bit more precise with it. Obviously it's going to be a bit smaller on the drawing, but that's how we're going to go about it. And also the window frame on the bottom has to line up perfectly with the window frame on the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rub out these lines here now. They were used to guide me on the upper wall, so they're not really needed anymore. I'm going to be drawing more guidelines shortly when I'm guiding myself up to the top part of the window frame. Now the position of the window frame also, sometimes people get confused. You can fix it basically anywhere across the cavity. You can start off, I'm going to just pick a point here resting, And as I said, I'm going to draw a rectangle 100mm wide. Do it all lightly. And we'll say 70 high. There is room for variation on those sizes, but that's what I'm going to go for. This is all done lightly. I'm just doing it a bit darker for the sake of the video. What I've done there is I've drawn this fixed frame part. Next I'm going to draw the actual part that opens out, so I'm going to say 60 by 60 for that. So I'm going to go 3mm in there, roughly. 3mm down here. And as I said, I'm going to make that 60 that way, and 60 that way. Also, important to note, there's variation on sizes there. And I'll rip out that little part there now, which is not going to be part of it. So far, I'll go over heavily the outline of my window frame. Now I also need to take a little slot out of this part here to allow the glazing or the glass to slot into. So again, I'm going to go over in around halfway on that, so let's go 3mm over there. And I'm going to go down 2 or 3mm there and draw that little slot in there. So just to go over heavily then, that actually is going to stay. I rubbed that out accidentally. And that is the window frame, the fixed frame, and that's the casement part of the window that opens out. Again, you look at some of these drawings, there might be a little bit of an angle on there just to give it a bit of an aesthetic look. By all means, feel free to add those little angles into place. Don't overthink them. I might even as well bring a bit of an angle down that way on it also. Make a slot in and makes it look a bit more like a window. But as I said, don't overthink those. If you were to not even draw in those angles, I don't think you'd lose any marks in an exam situation. What we have there is the overall shape of the window frame. Just like with any of these tricky parts, a little bit like the slates in the roof, it can be a bit frustrating drawing these, especially your first time doing it. It's all practice getting that done. I'll just zoom in a bit closer on that so we can see it. Alright, the glazing is going to be drawn in. I'm going to come up to those parts, we'll come to that shortly. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do the exact same thing on the top, only the other way around. I need to make sure these line up perfectly with each other. So some guidelines. I'll draw the fixed frame on the bottom of it first to avoid any confusion there. So it needs to go from here to here. I've actually left out my cavity closure on the top of that wall. So we have a cavity closer going across there. That cavity closer actually needs to go all the way across, like so. Again, our cavity closer is that plastic member. So I've guided myself up there. I said 100 by 70, so I'm going to come down here 70 again. Give me that block, and then I'm going to guide myself up with the casement part of the window. Alright, and that was 60 by 60. So that what I'm doing here now is basically this upside down, one the other way around. So 60. Okay. And there's my two kind of squares. And I now need to take out a little slot there for the glazing to line up perfectly for me. What about those guidelines now as well? Just so things are more clear for us. And just like with the last one, I might add a couple of little angles on here and there to make the window look more attractive. And that's pretty much the frame done there. Okay, so that is the framework done. Now we're going to just add in our triple glazing, or double glazing for this window. I know for double glazing we want to make the glass about 1mm thick, so draw a line down there. Measure yourself roughly, even if you want to mark in position there, roughly 1mm if not less. There's one piece of glazing. There's another piece of glazing, so you've got your two bits of glass in there. Okay, and that is most of it done. As you can see, the tricky part is in those window frames and the glazing, but it's like anything, a bit of practice and a bit of fine tuning to do, and then labeling. We want to put some insulation into the middle of the window frame here and into that frame there. How big is that insulation? Don't overthink it. Just draw yourself a little square in the middle of that. Have it fairly even in the middle to represent our insulation, so there's no thermal bridge coming through that frame. And the same thing in here. Draw yourself a little rectangular square of insulation to represent the thermally broken frame. Same up here, I'll line those up so they're the same. So insulation showing a thermally broken frame there also. There is, at the head area of the drawing, there's always an extra bit of insulation here, just to try and help avoid any issues with ingress of cold air or warm air escaping, more importantly. So there's a doubly thick piece of insulation down along there. And then one add a little bit DPC. The top part of these drawings, these windows, even doors as well, DPC is going to go all the way across here, down and over the front. Alright, So the DPC, vertical DPC can be called. It's going to go all the way across. It's quite a wide piece of DPC. I'm going to come down the front of that, and it even comes down a small bit there. That'll stop any driving water or rain coming up through there. That section, it's blocked off, and no rising dam can get up through that way area either. This works, so you can see a bit of the cavity closer is exposed there, a bit of the cavity closer is exposed there. That'll all be tidied up by the plasters. So the internal layer of plaster is usually about 12 millimeters thick. So there's an internal layer of plaster which just tidies up all of that, covers over any exposed parts. So on the inside, that is known as internal plaster. On the outside, more so, it's called a render. So the same, it's usually a bit thicker, maybe 18 or 20 millimeters thick of a render. So the small, so the external part is known as the render, and that'll tidy up, as we said, any look of untidiness around there. There's a little window board, so in the inside of your windows you'll see a wooden member there, a window board. They'll vary in size. It's come out usually about 20 millimeters thick, so it'll come up there, and then just a little bull nose on the front of that. Alright, at that point then it's just time for labelling, and you know, as I always say, nice and neat and tidy work with your labels. Right, so I like to just bring lines out. So at the bottom part, I'm going to do all these parts down here, maybe some of the window sections over here. Nice straight, neat and tidy work with that. So for example, I'm going to bring a line out for the cavity closer, a line out for the internal concrete leaf, the cavity insulation, the cavity, and the external leaf. So, as I said, nice and tidy with your writing even as well. Cavity closer, 100 millimeters internal concrete block, 100 mm insulation, cavity insulation, cavity, and 100 mm external block. Over here I'll label the windowsill, and the two measurements we use for the windowsill: 275 by 100 concrete sill. Actually, DPC needs to be wrapped around the underside of that concrete sill also. And there's a little drip needs to be put in there as well, so smaller details. Try not to forget getting those done. From that point then we'll start maybe labelling parts of the windowsill. So I'll come up here, let me see, I'll come out here. I'll actually go up the other side for that, have more space, or bring it up at maybe a bit of an angle just so it's out of the way. So 100 by 75 fixed frame. And then this part of the window, I'll come off this side. We can say 60 millimeters. 60 by 60 millimeters bottom rail. Just mention the double glazing. glazing label there. We don't need to label these parts because they're the same as up here. We will label up here though the 100 by 80 concrete lintel. We'll label the vertical DPC. We'll label a 12mm internal plaster. And 18mm external render. And that will have us everything pretty much labelled. Alright, so that's that drawing detail done. As we said, practice is certainly needed on the window frame section. Even kind of getting your own head around visualising what we have there. So we've got the window frame and the bottom part, the bottom rail and the top rail of the part that opens out. If you can get your head around that, you'll be able to do most window details there. So that's done.